Welcome back, biology class. Today we are going to be looking at speciation, which is part 3 of Unit 7, our evolution unit. So to start out, we've got a new learning target, and that is I can apply how changes in the environment can lead to changes in a species population by understanding speciation. So your bell work question for today is, what is a species? A species is defined as a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring with one another. Speciation is the evolution of a new species that occurs when members of a similar population branch off from each other and can no longer interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Sometimes we can have something that's called hybridization, which is the interbreeding between animals or plants of different species that results in an organism that is not fertile. So they get offspring, but the offspring are not fertile. The classic example here of a hybrid is a mule, which is the cross between a horse and a donkey. Horses have 64 chromosomes, donkeys only have 62. A mule has 63, kind of an in-between, but the mule is not fertile. It cannot produce its own offspring. Mules cannot make other mules. So therefore, it is not considered a species. Okay. Now, when we look at speciation, speciation can occur either quickly or very slowly. You can see here's a sort of slow change over time. This would be morphological changes that are happening. This is called gradualism. And you can see that over time, they're just slightly changing as they branch off until in the end, we get 2 new species from one beginning species. Over here on the right side, this is called punctuated equilibrium. You can see we start out with 1 species, it hangs out for a while, and then at very specific points in time, it quickly changes. And now we end up with 3 different species. So there are 3 types of selection that are going to control or produce speciation. There's what's called disruptive selection, stabilizing selection, and directional selection. And we've got some sort of graphical ways of thinking about them, but let's dive into each one separately to try to understand what each one means. So the first type of speciation is called disruptive selection. This is where extreme values for a trait are favored over intermediate values. This usually favors the homozygotes, the ones that are either homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. A good example would be rabbit color. So if it's homozygous dominant, it's black. If it's heterozygous, it's gray. If it's homozygous recessive, it's white. In an environment that's made up of black and white stones, the black one and the white one are going to both blend in the best, but not the gray. So over time, so this is the middle, over time that those gray ones are going to just kind of go away. And we're going to end up with the majority of our rabbits being on the extreme ends of the spectrum, either black ones or white ones. And we don't get a lot of the mid-range. So that's disruptive selection. So it's disrupting it. The next type of speciation is called stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection operates most of the time in most populations. This type of selection acts to prevent divergence of form and function. This tends to favor the heterozygous version of genotypes. Great example of this is human baby birth weight. If a baby is born with too low of a birth weight, it cannot maintain body temperature. It's hard to survive. If the birth weight is too high, then the baby will be difficult to deliver, and that's also hard to survive as well. So you'll notice most babies are kind of in this mid-range, right? They're probably going to be somewhere in the like 6 to maybe 8 pound range. Like that's going to be the average baby. Obviously, there are babies that are smaller than that, but they're going to be down near the sort of left sides of this curve. There are babies that obviously weigh more than 8 or 9 pounds. Those will be on the other end, but we don't get a lot. So the majority end up in that like middle sections. Not all, but the majority of them. And then the last one is what's called directional selection. This is where one form of a trait is favored over the other. Directional selection occurs most often under environmental changes and when populations migrate to new areas with different environmental pressures. This one is probably the most connected to human impact on the environment. For example, the color of moths in Europe or tusks in elephants. If you don't know these two examples, in the 1800s, there were these moths in Europe. You can see over here in this right-hand side. They're called peppered moths. And most of the peppered moths in the early 1800s were sort of a light color like you see here on this bark. But during the Industrial Revolution, especially in England, the soot from the chimneys on factories put a lot of soot into the air, and that soot would land on the trees and it would blacken them. Well, because they were blackened, these white sort of peppered moths would stand out and they'd get picked off by birds. Whereas the dark colored moths, which you see down here underneath, they would blend in better. And so after a while, after about 50 years, the dark colored moths were the ones that dominated. Same thing with tusks and elephants. People have been hunting elephants for their tusks for probably the last couple hundred years because of the value. And so as a result, elephants are now being born with smaller and smaller tusks because that helps them actually to avoid being hunted or preyed upon by humans. We also have isolation. This is when populations get separated from each other. This came up in the last set of notes. Over time, their differences magnify and can become two different species, no longer able to mate together. Examples are geographic isolation. So a barrier pops up, a lake or a river or a canyon or a mountain range, and it prevents breeding. Like in Africa, we have these different lakes and rivers and canyons that's going to separate species from each other. Okay. This animation here, this shows how the continents have moved over time. And so by continents moving, that creates separation. And that separation ends up, so if there were species that were living on the continent before when it was together, once it gets separated and there's an ocean between them, those species are going to change over time to where eventually those species are not going to be able to interbreed with each other after millions and millions of years. And then we also have coevolution. This is when two species evolve in response to each other, usually because it benefits each of them, like in symbiosis or in a predator-prey relationship. Examples, again, hummingbird beaks match the tube shape of flowers, and then lions over time have gotten faster because gazelles have gotten faster. So here's your EOC question of the day. Purple coneflower is a common plant in India. One year during the drought, the plants that had a shorter growing period survived better than the ones with a longer growing period. What effect does this most likely have on the plants? So answer that at the end of this Ed puzzle, and that should complete your Ed puzzle. And if you have any questions, bring those questions to class, please.